Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm the founder and principal of North Star Solutions and Services. I'm just getting set up here for our free live training on a very important future of work skill, namely remote team building. So I'm just going to give it another few minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Can you hear me now? Okay. Once again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. And as you join us, feel free to put in the chat window where you're joining us from, city, state, and country. I love to create these opportunities for people to connect with one another and continue on the conversations even after the session. And I really love to see the LinkedIn events set up chats as well. So that's fantastic. So we have Tiffany from Pittsburgh. I see Sajid Kumar, Ira. Uh, I've met a lot of you on LinkedIn. Hi, Nicole. So welcome, everyone. We just have one more minute to get started. And while we get set up, what I'm going to do is share a link with you. And I'd like you to download the content from this link. And I'm going to put that in the chat window. Hello, everyone. And here's the link. If you wouldn't mind going to this link and you can download the PDF, that way you can follow along. Hello again. I'm doing an audio check. Is there anyone that cannot hear me? If you can put that in the chat window, please. Okay. So I'm assuming that everyone can hear me. All right. Okay. Thank you. So welcome to this live training session on what I consider to be a very, very important future of work skill, remote team building. Why remote team building and why me talking about it? Well, I'll get started with a quick introduction. So my name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm the founder and principal of North Star Solutions and Services, which is a 100% virtual boutique future of work oriented coaching, consulting, and training practice. And why me? Because one, I've had a very interdisciplinary and cross cultural career spanning more than 2 decades. And I've spent most of my career at the intersection of people, process, and technology, and that's where I operate the best. And so at North Star Solutions and Services, my mission is to partner with mid career IT and Agile professionals globally to help them be their best at this powerful intersection of people, process, and technology. So I work with mid-career professionals and small and medium enterprises to help build and strengthen their future of work skills and behaviors. And the main ones that I focus on are agile, collaborative, and inclusive ways of working, remote leadership, that's why we are here today, and impactful change communication. I spent about, like I said earlier, more than 2 decades in corporate India and America. And as of August of 2019, I started off as a solopreneur with Nostra Solutions and Services. I've also spent a lot of time leading and working with teams, cross-cultural teams, geographically distributed teams, especially in the IT and Agile environment. So my goal here today, and I want to get into some disclaimers and declarations, if you will. Number one, everything that I'm going to talk about today, it's not rocket science. And my goal here is to really remind everyone of the possibilities that exist in making remote work and remote team building successful. A lot of it is already out there, and we as adults, we need not so much to be taught as to be reminded about things, and that's my goal here today. And I would like all of us to be able to walk away with three main takeaways. One is focusing on leading with self-awareness. That's number one. And number two, figuring out some things to remember around facilitation when done remotely. And so, starting with um, focusing on self leadership and leading with self awareness. The second point is to look at facilitating teamwork virtually. And the third thing, I want to share a very effective way of doing that by starting off with what I love to call as social contracting that's specific to remote teams. So the content that I just shared with you via the Google Drive link, that's the content that I'll be walking through today. And I wanted to do a quick check in the chat. Is there anyone that cannot access that link? I'll also be putting it on the LinkedIn chat room. So does everyone have access to this? Okay, thank you. All right, so I was doing some reading, and I'm sure all of us, number one, all of us, regardless of where we are in the world and what we do, where we come from, one way, shape, or form, we have been affected by the pandemic. Some of us more acutely than others. So, for today's context, I wanted to look at some of the reasons why remote work has become even more critical, especially in the knowledge work environment. So, remote work is here to stay, no two ways about it. Um, More than 60% of organizations globally have considered or are considering making remote work the option, making that as a permanent option. So the goal today really here is to look at how can we make it work for us. So if remote work is here to stay, how can we make it work for us? And all of us, and I also want us to be mindful that all of us come from different generations, if you will. So a lot of us are used to having face-to-face interactions, working in an office environment, and to the other end of the spectrum, we have digital natives who are used to working from anywhere and collaborate using technology and do it well, and they've kind of figured out all the nuts and bolts of it. So that's the spectrum, really. The second point I wanted to call out is in the context of team building, my goal is to really look at each of us as individuals as leaders. So for me, leadership has never been about titles or positional power. So when I talk about team building, I look at it as each individual's responsibility in playing their role in building a team. I'm also a lean, agile, and human centered design practitioner. And in agile, the frameworks that I'm familiar with and use very often are Scrum and Kanban. So, one of the core constructs of a Scrum team is that it's a self organizing team. So, that's my approach to today's session. So let's dig right into it. The other thing, yes, before we go into that, I also wanted to call out that everything today we're going to be talking in threes and fives. It's easy to remember. I remember one of my mentors telling me that, I have 5 fingers, so it's easy to remember if there's 5 things. So I'm sticking to that today. So you'll see everything listed out in threes and fives. So the first thing here is the three things that I think are fundamental to remote team building. Everything starts with you. I always say that you are the most important person that you'll ever lead. So leading with self-awareness, that's the first thing that we're going to dive into. And the second point is how do you, now that you have developed your self-awareness, how do you now look at facilitating teamwork and team spirit, especially in a virtual environment? And lastly, we're going to look at how do we do this in the form of social contracting. So I invite you to consider different aspects of self-awareness. And I want to provide you with 5 questions as starting points. You are free to write your reflections as you go along, or you can just go back and do that again later. Another way of using this, so if you do have a team that reports to you, I would encourage you to use these questions with your team members as well as part of the social contracting process, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. So we have about, I want to say, about 40 odd minutes where I'll be doing a lot of the talking. I'm also monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, please pop them in the chat. And as and when it fits into my flow, I'll take them up. I do also want to call out that this is a one-way medium. All of you as attendees will only be able to interact with me via the chat window. So please make sure you put your questions and comments in the chat window, and feel free to interact with one another as well. So if you're following along in the document, the PDF that you had just downloaded, I'm looking at the first question on page 6 or slide 6, which is the first question is really, why are you doing what you're doing? When you start thinking about self-awareness, the key is to really start with why. And I know there's enough literature around that. The clarity of purpose drives it adds to your grit, and it helps you stick to whatever it is that you've taken up. And it's very important to understand where you're coming from. And there are 3 key aspects when you're looking at self-awareness, in my experience. One is understanding your values. 2 is understanding your strengths. And 3 is your communication style. And the way I usually call this out is your why, your what, and your how. So your values, your strengths, and your communication style. So being clear on why is it that you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. The next question that I invite you to consider is, in your remote team environment, what does success look like for you? Being clear about that, what your goals are from that, from being a part of that team. Uh, Once you've figured that out, looking at what resources and support do you need to be successful in that role, in that environment. Next, thinking in terms of when do you do your best work? Now, when I say when, I mean times of day. I mean environment. Are you someone that needs uh, guidance at every step? Do you like to check in at every step with your team and or your leaders? Or are you the person who says, you know what, just tell me what I need to do and let me be. If I have questions, I'll come back to you. How do you like to communicate, and how do you do your best work? So what does it take to deliver your best? Understanding that. Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? So there were some stats that I was going through. More than 60% of all teams that work remotely interact and operate in at least three cultures, and then not to mention time zones. So really understanding when is it that you are the most productive. Some of us don't talk to us before 9 in the morning. Some of us are night owls, and you may not be able to accommodate all of those individual ways of working and choices in a team environment when you're across different time zones. So how do you arrive at a happy medium? And before you figure this out for your team, it's important that you figure this out for yourself. And the fifth question that I wanted to present to you here is, how do you ask for help? Some people are very quiet. Some people ask a lot of questions. Some people will procrastinate. So each of us, we deal with not knowing or being stuck in different ways. So it's very important to realize, to spend some time to understand, how do you ask for help? How do you raise risks? So there's a whole bunch of things that you can look at in terms of self-awareness. I'm sticking with five in the interest of time, and also to help you have some tangible takeaways from this session. So I wanted to do a quick recap. So the five questions in terms of self-awareness that I invite you to consider are, starting with why. Why are you doing what you're doing? What does success look like for you? Uh, what do you need to be successful? When do you do your best work? And how do you ask for help? Yeah. I'm just going to pause for a couple of minutes here. If there are any questions or comments, please put them in the chat window. And I also want to give all of you a minute of quiet time to just consider these questions and note down your reflections. Okay. All right. So now, um, yeah, this is a very powerful quote, one of my favorites, by Lao Tzu. Mastering others is strength. Mastering oneself is true power. If you can put in the chat window the one word that comes up for you when you see this quote. Okay, I'll wait for the chat to populate. So now we are going to look at the second point that we had talked about in the beginning. Um, Facilitating teamwork virtually. I just seeing a comment in the chat window. So no, I'm not sharing anything on the screen. I sent the link to the PDF in the chat. So right now in the PDF, I'm looking at slide 12. Okay, so the response to the earlier quote by Lao Tzu, I see a comment that self-awareness is what pops up. Thank you. Keep the chats going. So we're looking at the second point now, facilitating teamwork virtually. So again, here I want to call out 5 pointers. Number 1, foundational, trust. And how do you make or break trust? So I want to call out a few things here. Uh, so and then all of these are put, in the context of remote environment. When in a remote environment, not everyone and not at all times has the luxury of um, using video. So you really are not able to see others. So you're working off of people's voice. You're picking up on tone of voice. You're picking up on how they come across and all of that. And in a remote environment, you build trust. Your work speaks for you. So whether or not you do something when you said you would do it, that's what builds trust for others. So establishing trust, it's important to focus on the say-do gap. So if you say you're going to do something by a certain time, making sure that you do it. If you say you're going to be, if you have accepted a meeting, making sure that you are there. Now think about it in terms of different time zones. A lot of us here are from different parts of the world. So just imagine if I fail to show up today. Would you trust anything that comes out of North Star Solutions and Services another time? So really focusing on the say-do gap. What you say and what you do have to be really, really aligned very, very closely, 100%. So that's the way you establish trust in a remote environment. And the things that I'm calling out, these I want to put this disclaimer out that I'm calling these things out as being extremely important in a remote environment. By no means am I saying that these are meant only for the remote environment. These are important in the remote environment. So that distinction is important to put out there. The second thing I wanted to call out is respect. Now, respecting people and their time. And it goes back to some of the things I just talked about earlier. When you set meetings, make sure that you're looking at other people's time zones, making sure that you're finding times that work for everyone. There are tools that can let you do that. So your simple Microsoft Calendar lets you add on at least 2 other time zones in your calendar. There is world time date and clock. There are all kinds of tools, online tools that will help you schedule times and learn very quickly what the other time zones are. When you're setting up meetings, calling out the different time zones. When you're setting up meetings, the other piece is being very inclusive. So instead of just using time zones as EST, IST, try to use the names of famous cities in those time zones. So if you notice, the flyer for this event had the names of the cities. I try to put that in the announcements. So I started with the EST, IST, and then I started using the city names. So making it inclusive, the goal is meeting people where they are, respecting them as people and their time. And one of the ways you show respect is by respecting people's time. Another way you show respect to people is by listening. And this is another thing, I'm sure a lot of us have heard this. We tend to listen to reply. So if you catch yourself formulating a response to what the person is asking or saying as you're listening to them, you're not really listening. So making sure that you're listening with the intent to understand, not with the intent to reply. That is a big way in which you show respect. Another piece here I wanted to call out from an inclusion perspective, you show respect to people by learning how to pronounce their names. Please do not shorten people's names without their permission. Please do not shorten people's names if they don't do that, right? A lot of times, and I can speak from experience, when people say, "Oh, can I call you this?" Out of respect for them, I say yes. I used to say yes. I've changed that now. So don't put people in that position. And on the other hand, be patient enough to teach people how to pronounce your name. So I write it out phonetically in my email. So I'll say Meenakshi. LinkedIn has this feature where you can record the pronunciation of your name. So please use these things. So respecting people by respecting who they are, by learning to pronounce their names properly, making sure you're pronouncing it correctly, respecting their time, and making sure you're checking into their physical location, their geographical location when you call for meetings or set deadlines for work. Lastly, in email communication or in any other communication, calling out that Saturday, the 13th of February, Washington, D.C. is already the 14th, Sunday, the 14th in Australia. So, think calling out deadlines for all applicable time zones. So, these are different ways in which you can show respect in a virtual work environment. I'm going to pause and look at the chat really quick. Hey, thank you for all the comments. Keep it going. The next piece I want to call out, the third important thing is intent does not equal to impact, is not the same thing. We as human beings, we tend to um, uh, judge ourselves based on intent and we judge others based on impact. So just flip it when you're in a team environment, right? So lead with thinking about the impact. If you intended, so if you wanted something on a deadline, you have a team that's supporting you and you have a client that's asking you for a certain report, and if you're going to put this in an email because that's the quickest way to communicate, think about how you're going to put it. Your intent is to communicate the urgency and the fact that we're already behind schedule. What is the impact you're creating? Do you want the support of your people to be able to do that work for you, or do you want to put people off? Do you want to pass on your stress to them? What is the impact that you're looking for? You're at the end of the day, the impact is the outcome that you're going to create as a result of this interaction. So thinking about intent and impact and making sure that we're clear about the fact that these are two very different things. Which leads us into the next thing. So I'm on page 16 of the PDF. Always ask, do not make assumptions. So making assumptions around the fact that everybody has understood everything that you've shared, people know what the deadlines are, that everybody knows what is supposed to be done. These are all assumptions. Asking and asking with respect and asking with empathy. Also, let's understand that particularly in these times, and this is going to continue when remote work, if remote work were to become the norm, let's say around the world, 100% of the organizations, then when you are working from home or from anywhere, you're also dealing with a lot of other things. So, work, first of all, in the future of work context, work is no longer a place you go to, it's an activity that you do. So, the focus has shifted from work life balance to really work life integration. And we have to all be cognizant of that. And I know it's easier said than done. It depends on organizational culture, it depends on individual mindsets. I get all of that. But the point is, what is it that you remember? We started with leading with self awareness and the concept of self leadership. So, what can you, as being a team member of a virtual team, do? Right? Ask and don't make assumptions. And if you and if everybody takes that up and sets that up as the one of the operating principles for the team, you will slowly start building what Amy Edmondson refers to as psychological safety within the team. So no snickering, no sitting smug, no rolling of your eyes. So everybody, this again goes back to really closing the gap in your say do. So the the more aligned your say and do are, the more psychological safety you will be able to create, and you will be able to set everyone up with courage in your team to ask. A lot of times people make assumptions because they're too afraid to ask. What if this is a silly question? What if this is a stupid question? What if I'm the only one who doesn't know that? Guess what? 90% of the time, if you think that, everybody else in the room is thinking the same thing. But then you're the one that gets to ask the question. The other piece I want to call out here is asking a question has to come from a place of respectful curiosity. If you have a question that's going to put someone down, so if you already know that the other person doesn't know the answer to this and you're still going to ask the question in a group, what is the intent of your question? So again, checking with yourself on what the intent is. Are you moving the conversation and the group forward by asking that question? There's this acronym called WAIT. Why am I talking? Always ask yourself that. By asking that question, are you going to move the conversation and the team forward? Or are you asking this question to prove that you know something that the others don't? If it's the latter, then you should not be asking that question. Yeah. Then the last point I wanted to call out here is really a summation of everything that I've shared so far, is that your success is in your team's success. Peter Drucker said, no one person is as smart as, sorry, Ken Blanchard said that. No one person is as smart as all of us. So each of our success is tied to our team's success. Have you ever heard of a project where you walk away saying, I did my job, but if the project misses the go live date, or if the implementation is unsuccessful, what gets talked about? Individual successes or the collective miss of the team? Just think about that. So it obviously makes common sense to start thinking about how you are serving towards your team's success. Yeah. I'm going to do a quick recap of leading or facilitating teamwork virtually. So, starting with trust, a good book to read on this will be The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. There's a 45-minute talk that he's done. There's a video on YouTube. So if you don't have the time to read the whole book, just watch that. It's just fantastic, and it's from the author himself. So the first thing on facilitating teamwork virtually, the foundational aspect is establishing and building trust. Mind the say-do gap. Second thing, respect people and their time. Third, impact and intent. I'm sorry, intent and impact, two different things. Don't confuse the two. And when you lead with the impact in mind. Design your intent around that and make sure you convey the intent uh, and with the impact that you want to create. Number 4, ask, not assume. And lastly, remember that your success is in your team's success. And with that, I want to give, again, 30 seconds for all of you to reflect and think about what's coming up for you, what's speaking to you out of these 5 things. And please feel free to share in the chat. Okay. And I want to call out this amazing quote by Vince Lombardi, the legendary American football coach, who says, "Individual commitment to a group effort. That is what makes a team work, a company work, a society work, a civilization work." So that's it. Your success is in your team's success. You as an individual are committing to a group effort, and that's the key to make team building work for you. Yeah. All right. The third thing that we had talked about. So far we have looked at leading with self-awareness, and the second thing we looked at was facilitating virtual teamwork. The third thing I wanted to focus on today is how do you start doing that? So this is something I've used with a lot of success. This is really inspired by something that I did when I was in graduate school in our study groups, and it's also something that is core to project management. You start with a team charter. Any kind of teams that you come together to work together on a project, you start with a team charter. So my concept of social contracting is really rooted in that. And I use a set of questions, and I'm going to share 5 of those with you today. And I've come up with a very easy to remember mnemonic. There are 5 C's. Okay, so let's get started. The first C is create. How does each member on your team create? How do they create value? How do they create impact? What is their secret sauce? What do they bring? What is that unique thing that they bring to the table? Their strength. So how do they create value and how do they create impact? Now here I distinguish between value and impact. Value is what they come with, and the impact is the value that's created for their stakeholders, right? So that's the difference that they make, and that's the impact. You, in my experience, I've come across a lot of folks with who are high, they have a lot of potential, so they bring a lot of value, but they're not as successful in translating all of that value to impact in a way that makes sense to their stakeholders. And very often you will end up seeing a lot of brilliant jerks, quote unquote brilliant jerks. And that's, to me, that's an example of that, where there's a lot of value, but then the translation of that value to impact is missing. So really understanding how each of your team members loves to, or what is their best way to create. That's the first C. The second C, how do they connect? How do they connect ideas with one another? And how do they connect with people? How do they connect the dots, right? So once they've created something, how do they bring it to the table? How do they connect? The third C, cultivate. So once you have done something, you have to nurture it. So how do they learn? What's their approach to growth? Does everyone look at outcomes in a binary with a binary lens, success or failure? Or are they comfortable with looking at everything as a learning opportunity? And this leads into growth mindset, right? You can look up Dr. Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. You can look up Satya Nadella. He based his entire organizational transformation of Microsoft that started in 2013, 2014 on this construct of growth mindset. So those of you that are interested, you must check out his book called Hit Refresh. And I think he came out with a version 2 as well of that. So how do people nurture what they have created and connected the dots with? How do they learn? How do they grow? The fourth C is how do they collaborate? By internal and external, I mean internal and external stakeholders. How do they collaborate within the teams, within the organization, and then within teams external to their within I'm sorry, within their organization, but other teams, and then external clients. So you have, if you're looking at it as a from a flow perspective, upstream and downstream, how do people collaborate with people who are upstream and downstream to them? So that's the fourth C. The fifth C, how do they communicate, right? How do they give feedback? How do they ask for help? How do they offer help? How do they call out risks? How do they tell you that something is not right? So, how do they communicate? Yeah. So, again, a quick recap of the five C's: create, connect, cultivate, collaborate, communicate. Yeah. I want to take a quick 30 seconds and invite all of you to share in the chat which of these C's really spoke to you. Which of these C's spoke to you? Cultivate, cultivate. Fantastic. That's great. All right. Um, Again, a quick recap. So if you look at page 4 of your PDF, that's what we've done in the last 30 minutes. We looked at leading with self awareness, facilitating teamwork virtually, and social contracting for remote teams. Yeah. I see some responses coming through for the five C's. Um, I did want to do a run through really quick. So, leading with self awareness, thinking about why are you doing what you're doing. So, again, for each of these three aspects, I've called out either five questions or five pointers that you can take with you. Um, why are you doing what you're doing? What does success look like for you? What do you need to be successful? When do you do your best work? And how do you ask for help? This is in terms of your self awareness. Facilitating teamwork virtually starts with number one, establishing trust. Mind the say do gap. Respecting people and their time. Number three, understanding and being very clear that your intent and impact are two different things, and consider the impact of what you're going to say or do. Number four, ask, not assume. Five, always remember that we are in this together. Your success is in your team's success. And then lastly, the five C's: create, connect, cultivate, collaborate, and communicate. I saw some responses here: cultivate and communicate. So those are the C's that spoke to different people. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Collaboration is another one that's been called out. And absolutely, I totally agree that collaboration and teamwork are not limited to within organizations. See, being boundaryless, that's another big feature of the future of work, because our lines between our digital and physical worlds are blurring. And so, now literally the world is your marketplace, right? So that brings me to the end of the content per se that I wanted to share with you today. So before we close out and get into questions, I did want to do a call to action. And this is something I would encourage you to actually write down or type it, share it in the chat window, whatever works for you. So my call to action for you today is and you can find this in slide 26 or page 26 of the PDF. What's the one action you're committing to today that will strengthen your remote team building skills? From everything that you've heard from me today, and or that's sparked something off for you, what's the one action you're committing to today that will strengthen your remote team building skills? Just a few seconds for you to share that. Ask, not assume. Thank you. Working around time zones. Absolutely. Thank you. Effective communication to engage. Fantastic. Great. Please keep the chats coming. And one last thing before we get into questions. I love this John Maxwell quote that says, people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. Um, I think it was just yesterday or day before, that I posted on LinkedIn about the concept of, it was actually an analysis that was done by the Boston Consulting Group, um, titled the Head, Heart, and Hands of Transformation. So this whole concept of leading and having a balance in leading with your head, heart, and hands, right? Your head is what builds out your strategy. It's able to look far ahead, think in terms of, okay, what are the big rocks that are there? And your heart is all about inspiring and engaging with people. And your hands are that translates everything into tangible action. So if you think about it, think about, what do you lead with the most? What do you use the most when you lead and when you are part of a team, a remote team? Is it your head, heart, or your hands? What do you lead with? And then think about um, what John Maxwell says here. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. So striking that balance among your head, heart, and hands. Yeah. That's all I had in terms of the content that I wanted to present to you and share with you. And now I'm happy to take questions through the chat. And I think there's a bit of a lag in the chat coming through. So please feel free to put the questions here. While you do that, wanted to call out that all of my contact information is on the last page, slide 28. And I really want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here. I know in some parts of the world it's Saturday night. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here on a weekend, regardless of where you are in the world. It's a weekend. So thank you very much for that. Um, I see a question about recording. Yes, so this will become available on the YouTube channel. So that's the other thing. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Northstar Solutions and Services. You should see a subscribe button right there, a red button. Go ahead and subscribe. So you will start receiving notifications as well. And thank you for all the comments and the interaction in the chat. Really appreciate that. We still have a few more minutes if there are any questions. Okay. I'm just going to, how important is EQ for effective communication? Very, I would say, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. I do want to call out, though, that the intent versus impact, I think, is very important in this context. So there are a lot of considerations to make when you think in terms of emotional intelligence. Number one is, again, going back to the intent versus impact. Why are you talking, right? Why am I talking? So, or saying something or communicating. Why are you doing that? Being very clear on the purpose of that communication, and also thinking about what is the impact it is going to generate on the person that you're communicating with. Thinking about, is it going to, something that I said earlier, is it going to move the conversation and that situation forward? Um, Answering these questions for yourself, and I know, see, when you're in the conversation, when it's live, you probably don't have a lot of time to think about these things. And this is where taking the time, creating that time for yourself, and a little bit of distance between yourself and your emotions is important. You don't have to respond to everything at the same time, at the time that it's happening. It's perfectly okay to say that I need to think about this a little bit and I'll get back to you. And then it goes back to maintaining no gap between your say do. So if you said you're going to get back, you will get back. And that's how you generate trust as well. So coming back to this question around how important is EQ for effective communication, I would say definitely it's very important, but being very clear on your why, so clear on your intent for communication, the impact it's going to create on the others when you do that, take that action. Um, Also, I want to call this out um, from a gender perspective. A lot of times, the unconscious biases that we have around how men tend to communicate versus how women tend to communicate, and being kind is being mistaken for someone's weakness. So being aware of those kind of social constructs that we operate under, good, bad, ugly, that's the truth, right? So being conscious of that, um, and also uh, conveying your competence around. So I've seen a lot of technology projects, for example, the gender dynamics really come out in those teams. And I think that leading with confidence, with subject matter expertise, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, and leaning in on that and being open. So if I'm proposing a solution, being open to hearing what others have to say and being open to adjusting what I have said, right? So not this is something I said, and I read recently. It's also something that Adam Grant talks about in his latest book, Think Again. Don't trust every thought that comes in your head, right? So being open to feedback, and that's true agility. Being open to inspect and adapt, and you are constantly in touch with your audience and your whoever is on the other side, receiving end of your communication. Um, just want to check if that answers the question. I know the chat takes a bit of time to come through. Okay. I see another question here. Tracking the performance of the team that's working virtually seems to be harder and almost impossible. What advice can you give about that? Hmm. So, number one goes back to your social contracting, right? Understanding where or when people work their best, when do people like meetings? So, in our in we get a lot of work done by meetings, right? Anywhere from 50% to almost 90% of our time is spent in meetings. So, if that's the case, then when do people find the time to work? Do their work where they're supposed to take action out all those action items that come out of all these meetings. So before thinking about how to track the performance, let's take a step back and look at do we have the environment where people can perform? So if this is again something that I read very recently. Um, if a plant is not doing well in your garden, do you just pluck the plant out or do you look at what's happening in the environment? It's the same thing with people. So before we start thinking about tracking performance, let's be clear on what are we tracking and why are we tracking? And more importantly, let's step back and look at do we have the environment? And the basic elements of this environment go back to do people feel like they belong? Do people feel like they can trust each other? Do people feel like somebody on the team has got their back? So if I, so examples, uh, let's say there's so I've been on projects. I'm currently on a project with other team members. Now, as a team, we know that we have a deadline next Wednesday. Now, if I'm a responsible team member, then I'm not going to just track my work. I'm also going to track, hey, as a team, we're supposed to deliver this report to the client on Wednesday morning. And the agreement in place for the team as a team charter is that anything that goes out to the client will be reviewed by the team collectively. And it is Tuesday afternoon, and if I have not seen anything come through, and it's not assigned to me, it's assigned to my team member, and it's Tuesday afternoon and I have not seen anything come through, what do I do? Do I reach out to the person and ask if they need help with completing the report? Do I just sit and wait for um, things to unravel? So this is what goes into creating that environment. So to me, if you spend, and yes, this is a lot of time investment, this is a lot of hard work, but you do it once and you're set. It's like building a house. You have to have your foundation of the house. So instead of looking, because tracking performance is like, in healthcare terms, are you treating the disease or the symptom? So tracking performance to me is not as important. It's, I wouldn't say not as important. Let me rephrase that. Tracking performance is way down the line. There are so many things that need to happen. It's a domino effect. You will automatically have phenomenal performance if the environment has been set up correctly. That was a long-winded answer. Um, so if you want to let me know through the chat if that makes sense. Some tangible tips on that would be really setting clear agreements in place. And mind you, I'm using the word agreement because it's a team. So it's not a diktat that's coming from the top. So what's the agreement of the team? Setting those up in place. And you are then building those guardrails that will automatically lead you to a high performing team. So you can have checkpoints like, so let's say if you are the team lead, you can say, you know what, from this time to this time, I'm going to do open office, which means I set up whatever your video conferencing or your meeting tool is, you are available in that virtual meeting room from 6 in the evening to 7 in the evening to answer any questions for anyone. And that's how you keep you check in with people on how they're doing. You could have a daily stand up like Scrum teams do. Figure out a time that works for all the different time zones. do a 15-minute check-in where everybody checks in with each other to share what they're going to work on, what challenges do they have, who needs help. And depending on the kind of work, kind of industry you're in, you may want to do an end of day check-in. So these are different ways in which you can ensure that everybody is connected, everybody knows that there is a fallback, especially during these days where mental health concerns are really skyrocketing. So keeping all of that, I would take a holistic approach to performance management. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. All right. We just have 4 more minutes. Any questions, closing thoughts? All right. I'm also available on LinkedIn, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can also keep up the chat for the event going. I'm just going to put the event link one more time, so I'll upload the PDF there as well. Um, Working remotely is eroding trust. In my opinion, trust has very little to do with the medium in which you meet with people, meaning whether it's face to face or virtual. I've had some of the um most phenomenal collaborative work that I've done with people are with folks that I've never met in real life, in person. They're all through LinkedIn or other online channels. So we've been able to work successfully. And you're seeing this more and more around the world, that collaboration has really um, gone up by so many notches in this virtual world. And none of that can happen if there's no trust. So I don't think that working remotely erodes trust away. I think that it is individual mindsets, and I think that it's practices and the intentionality of the team, of the individuals. Every team is as strong as its weakest person, as its weakest link, right? Now, strong, weak are very relative terms. The point is everyone aligned, and does everyone value the same things, right? When there are differences in what people value, that's when you see challenges with trust. It's got nothing to do with whether you work in an office or whether you work through Zoom. That's my opinion. Agile and personal life goals. Okay, here's my 30-second answer. This YouTube live is my MVP, my minimum viable product. This is the first time I've done this, and I figured things as I went along. So after I set this up this morning, I realized that the way I've set this up, just using a webcam, I cannot share my screen. So that's when I inspected and adapted to quickly making this available as a PDF to the audience using a shared Google Drive. So I would say figure out your MVP. What is the minimum that you need in order to figure out your next first step? That's it. To me, that's being agile in personal goals. I hope that answered your question. It's being focused on learning. Every interaction, everything that you do in life is a learning opportunity, whether you do it by yourself or whether you do it with others. All right. Okay. So we're all out of time. Once again, thank you very much for being here on a weekend, and thank you for all the comments and the interaction in the chat. Please keep it up in LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you again very, very much. Have a great rest of your weekend. Wherever you are, be safe, and best wishes with everything. Thank you very much, guys. Bye.